Hello and welcome to the Guardian Football Weekly. It's a month until the World Cup and we're getting lots of questions like, when are you going to talk about what's happening in the US? Well, even if we have covered it a lot in passing, consider this an official start. We're joined by two experts in the US to discuss ticket prices, Iran, visas, ICE, Trump, Gianni, public transport and general enthusiasm for the tournament. We'll also discuss the US side and their chances, grassroots football, all that on a bonus episode of the Guardian Football Weekly. On the panel today, Alex Abnos, Senior Sports Editor at the Guardian, our friend from Austin, Texas. Welcome, Alex.
Hello, Max.
I mean, not from Austin, Texas, but that's when we had our wild times together. Leander Schaerlaeckens, soccer journalist, author of The Long Game, US Men's Soccer and its savage 4-decade journey to the top or thereabouts. And we'll get to Leander to whether it's got to the top yet or whether it'll get to the top this summer in a bit. Hey, Leander, how are you?
Hi, Max.
Barry is here, as always. Hi, Baz.
Hi, Max.
As with every major tournament, we have that tricky balance of wanting to enjoy the football without ignoring the political climate. We've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again, no doubt. I'm going to start with this email from George, who says, hey, Max, Barry, and everyone else. Monday marks 1 month before the World Cup begins. Usually it feels like there's a lot more buzz around the tournament. Is it just me or does it feel very flat this time around? Any thoughts on why? Is it general apathy towards a grotesquely large competition being run by grotesquely shameless men who are turning it into an inevitable vanity parade? Is it because the Premier League title race is still interesting? Is it the general negative news stories, e.g. ticket prices that are streaming out from across the Atlantic? I also wonder how Mexicans and Canadians are feeling about it all. They're supposed to be co-hosts, but being treated like bit part players. And I suppose in the UK, like, it is still the football season, right? We're not thinking about the World Cup and we won't for a couple of weeks, I guess. What's it like over there?
It's not the football season. I mean, it is your football season that many people are paying attention to. I think, as with many big events in the US, you know, the ramp up hasn't really started yet. I think you often find with tournaments like this, you see this with the Olympics too, it's very much not happening until it's on the absolute most eve of it happening. And then it's all that anybody is talking about. And it tends to go that way for the entire length of time that it exists. So, you know, is everybody on the street here talking about the World Cup? Not really. I mean, you know, I've certainly had more conversations about it in the last month or so than I have in the month previous, but it's not as if it's the only thing on everybody's minds right now. I think you'll see that change in a very, very big way, maybe in a couple weeks, and then exponentially more so in the next week. And then once the tournament starts, it's all anybody's going to be talking about because these games are going to be happening and they're going to be bringing people to people's doorsteps, sometimes literally. There's a little bit ways to go, but that's not necessarily a bad thing or all that unusual.
Yeah. Would you go with that, Leander?
There was a poll conducted a month ahead of the 1994 World Cup, which was the last one that was held here, and it found that 80% of Americans at that time didn't know what the World Cup was or that it was going to be on their doorstep. So if we take a comparison, we are miles ahead of there, where at least people know what it is. But there is a lot of other programming on. The NHL playoffs are going on, the NBA playoffs are going on, baseball season is going. So it's just not something people are really thinking about as much with a few weeks to go, which is sort of as you would expect this time before World Cup. But you see little snippets of it left and right. You walk into stores or businesses that are sponsors and you'll see World Cup signage and stuff like that. So it's starting to creep into daily life very slowly.
If we go through the major sort of political concerns to begin with, I guess Iran and its involvement, Alex, and Infantino basically saying, no, look, it's all fine. They'll be in America. I've decided this. And obviously this is such a moving story. So we record this today and then by the time it goes out, it may not be relevant. How do you see that playing out?
Oh, geez. If I knew or if I had any definitive vision.
That's not a fair question. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But if I had any sort of definitive vision for how this would play out, I would be probably doing something else. Yeah, I mean, it's really, really tough to say. As you say, there have been yet another volley of words between our various countries' governments. It's difficult to know what, if any, effect that will have on the soccer team's participation in the World Cup. One would think it would be very important, but, you know, if that was truly the case, I think Iran would have been out of the tournament a long time ago. I think it is in the best interest of a lot of different stakeholders for them to take place and for the tournament to go on uninterrupted. And I think that them being withdrawn from the tournament or kicked out of the tournament or however it happens would just come with a lot of questions and a lot of talking points, a lot of logistical issues that I don't think, frankly, a lot of people want to deal with. Personally, I want to see Iran play at this World Cup. I think that they're just a fantastic story and are always a fantastic story because despite all of the sanctions that have been levied on them over so many years and despite their kind of pariah status, sometimes deservedly so among the international community, their soccer team has continued to be amazing and they're consistently one of the best in Asia. They've earned their spot in this World Cup on the backs of their play on the field. So I would kind of prefer they just sort of are allowed to see that till its conclusion, whenever that may be.
A couple of days ago, the head of the Iranian Football Federation said that they would play at the World Cup subject to a list of 10 conditions they were laying out being met. And the conditions didn't seem particularly unreasonable to me. A lot of them were related to visas, fan travel, their anthem being treated respectfully, etc., etc. I imagine that the American administration might balk at some of those conditions. As things stand, they're due to play the 3 group games in the States, 2 in LA, 1 in Seattle. So I don't think their participation is in any way guaranteed yet. It's too early to say.
It's really interesting because I think the anthem point, at least, is 100% directed mostly at the fans of them that they will be playing in front of, because Los Angeles has the biggest Iranian diaspora population in the United States, many of whom, I would say the vast, vast, vast majority, are no fans of the regime that is currently in place. So if anybody's going to be booing or whistling or whatever during the Iranian national anthem, I would think it's going to be a lot of Iranian fans in Los Angeles. How FIFA plans to control that? I don't know how you do that. I know that at least with displays of political signage and shirts that are anti regime, which was I know was also on that list of demands. They do have a measure of control over that in the sense that they can see fans as they're coming in and pat them down and make sure they're not bringing in anything. But that's also nothing new because they did that in Qatar as well, because those games took place right in the middle of the Masa Amini protests. There were lots of people that were entering in that first group game against England wearing Women Life Freedom shirts. And then by the second game, most of them were no longer wearing those shirts or being made to remove them. And the makeup of the crowd changed in a very noticeable way from games 1 to 2 and then also to 3. The difference now is that Iran cannot send their own people from the regime. People from Iran cannot travel to the U.S. in the vast majority of cases to try to affect the makeup of the crowd in the same way. So I think probably the Iranian football head was looking at this situation saying, FIFA, help us out here, because I think it's very likely that should they play in Los Angeles especially, it's going to be sort of ground zero for a lot of political displays.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I suppose, Leander, what experience tells us about these major tournaments is once the football starts, everything else sort of disappears, and then we enjoy the football and we can worry about everything else later. But given the unpredictability of Trump, I suppose, and again, it's not a question that's easy to answer. It's you just don't know if that will happen in this case. It almost, if you sort of think about Russia or Qatar, right, which obviously have their own human rights issues, there's almost like a consistency with their leadership in a sort of, which is, do you understand the point I'm making, in a sort of weird kind of way, that Trump is so unpredictable that you don't know specifically with the US exactly how mid-World Cup he might make a decision on something.
It feels like every World Cup introduces its own set of issues, right? And I can't remember, this is going to be my 4th World Cup. I don't remember a single one where there wasn't some kind of problem and some kind of hand-wringing that was happening ahead of kickoff. And you're right, then usually once the football starts to happen, we kind of forget about everything and we watch all the pretty soccer and we move on. It feels like this World Cup is inventing entirely new categories of issues that were previously unknown to man. And there's just so many variables this time around, and there's so little consistency from day to day in the leadership that's overseeing this thing. We are run by a regime that will change on a whim, and that answers to one man, and that man is going to do what he's going to do depending on the last thing he was told or saw or heard. So it feels especially volatile. So there's just a million different things to worry about.
I was going to say, what are you most worried about?
the ability for people to come to this World Cup. I mean, aside from the cost of them, aside from the cost of travel and the hotels, is will people be allowed into this country? Will people be allowed out of this country, for that matter? Once they get here, will they be allowed to leave? Will it feel like a World Cup? The organizers have kind of been boasting that this is going to feel like 104 Super Bowls in 39 days because it's such a big event, and they're kind of trying to put it on an American scale. But what you see at the Super Bowl, by and large, is that it's only doctors and lawyers and executives who can afford to go to the thing, right? And so is it really going to be that celebration of the sport that we all hope to see, or is it just going to be fully gentrified and a 1% World Cup? That's what I'm really worried about.
Ticket prices then, such a massive talking point. Anecdotally, Alex or Leander, do you know people who bought tickets and are going to games and have bought tickets for prices that aren't absolutely extortionate?
I've heard from people that have managed to snag tickets that they consider to be not totally ridiculous. So I don't know anybody that's shelled out. We've heard stories from other people that I don't know personally that have shelled out thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars for tickets. And to those people, I say, good on you for having the money, I guess. But Gianni Infantino had a quote the other day at the Milken conference. This made the rounds because it was just so self-evidently ridiculous that he said that you cannot get into any game in the U.S., a college game is what he was referring to, but he's saying a college or professional game for less than $300. And it is so... The reason I say it's so self-evidently ridiculous is because, like, every single person, every single American that has lived in the U.S. for any amount of time, that has ever gone to a sports game anywhere in the U.S. knows that is just false. And a FIFA spokesperson was telling me that he was referring specifically to college football and professional football. And I think even in that case, it doesn't apply. Like, the only game that might apply to is the college football national championship game. And I mean, how many people are really going to go to that? It's just a ridiculous statement to make. I think FIFA are taking the existence of dynamic pricing, which is true. It does exist in North America, and it is used to raise ticket prices. And they're using that as sort of an excuse to raise the prices as much as possible, to generate as much revenue as possible. But this idea that Americans are just used to paying these prices just because dynamic pricing exists is just not true. It's just not.
I looked at FIFA's resale site a couple of hours ago. So the very cheapest ticket available for the final on FIFA's resale site is just shy of £7,000 sterling. For the third place playoff, it's £686. For the semi-finals, £2,000. Now, with apologies to our Austrian friends, they appear to be the coldest ticket in town as far as group games are concerned. So you can get a ticket for Austria-Algeria at 135 quid and Austria-Jordan, 135 quid. And Jordan-Algeria, £140. I'm not trying to condone FIFA's gouging in any way, but if they cap the prices on their resale site, one presumes the tickets will just end up on some other resale site at similar prices.
I think in that case, though, more tickets would probably clear down to what is a reasonable market value, because it feels like there's a decent amount of games where there's still inventory that hasn't been sold at all. A few days ago, there were still tickets to be had for the U.S. opener against Paraguay that just hadn't sold in the first place, but they were going at $1,120 a piece, which is extraordinary. I know some people that are going to go to the World Cup. I know a lot of them that aren't, because either they don't have the disposable income or it just isn't worth their while at that cost. Because for a family of four, best case scenario, you're looking at $1,000 to get yourself to a game, and it's more likely to be $2,000. And even in a country where the average household income is just under $84,000, that's a ton of money. There just aren't that many Americans that can afford to go to these things, and that's to say nothing of people who'd like to come here from elsewhere and have to pay for travel on top of that.
It is really wild to have this discussion about the biggest sporting event that's happening in the U.S. this whole year happening at the exact same time that affordability and general life stuff is also such a big talking point politically pretty much everywhere. I mean, granted, I live in New York City, so I'm like, I listen to the affordability mayor every single day. But the reason that he won on that is because it's a thing that people are talking about. And it's just like these two realities can't exist at the same time. Americans are struggling to afford things. That is a fact. These tickets are too expensive. That is also a fact. FIFA making all sorts of excuses like we're used to this, it just doesn't wash to me at all.
FIFA tripled the price of its best available tickets to the World Cup final, making $32,970 seats available. It previously had a high price of $10,990 for Category 1. And I suppose the thing is that, like, I love football, but, like, a game can be bad. And, like, there's a sort of amount you can spend on something. Like, it doesn't matter how nice the steak is if you've spent, like, $1 million on it, right? If you're sitting there in your seat thinking, I paid $10,000 for this, and it's still 0-0. Matt Hughes reporting that outside of FIFA's marketplace, ticket prices appear to be falling, according to ticketdata.com, which tracks prices from a number of resellers, including StubHub, SeatGeek, and Vivid Seats. The cheapest available for 87 of the 91 matches in the USA and Canada had fallen over the past 14 days. It's so hard if you are a fan of a team that don't often qualify for a World Cup. I feel for, like, Scotland fans, say, who go, well, when is our next one? Okay, there are more teams in the World Cup. Who knows by the next World Cup? Gianni might have 200 teams in here. But, like, you just don't know when your next World Cup will be.
Yeah, well, our mate Barca Jim has told me about Scottish fans he knows of who aren't going. Some of them because they've had their collars felt in the past and are worried that they won't get visas because they've got criminal convictions, and others because it's just prohibitively expensive. So what they're going to do instead is pitch up in Benidorm, the Spanish holiday resort, for the duration of the group stages. And I'm sure they'll have a lovely time, and it'll cost them a fraction, like a very small fraction of what it would have cost them to go to the States. I know England fans who never miss a tournament who are skipping this one because of the expense. I know of one fella who works at The Guardian who isn't going. He said he can afford it, but he just doesn't fancy it because of Trump and Infantino and ICE and whatnot. So it's Ireland haven't qualified. I would have been interested to see how many Irish would have travelled if they qualified, but there are so many Irish in America, they would still be massively represented in the stadiums even if the fans weren't from Ireland, but they're not there, so it's irrelevant. New Jersey Transit ramping up the prices for fans to commute out to the stadium because FIFA, it's going to cost them about 50 million quid of taxpayers' money to ferry people to and from matches. So just all the additional expense on top of already overpriced tickets doesn't make it an attractive proposition at all.
Yeah, just on that public transport thing, Alex, is that because there was a bit of a sort of to and fro between, I saw one governor posting a video and then FIFA replying. Like who is right about this?
Can everybody be wrong?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Is that an acceptable answer? I mean, I will say, I think I understand where the New Jersey government is coming from. They were sort of grandfathered into this deal to host World Cup games without any real plan for how this was not going to cost the state and its taxpayers a huge amount of money. So they needed to make it up somehow, and they decided to make it up that way. So I have a degree of understanding for why things played out the way they did as far as that goes. I don't know if a $150 train ticket is necessarily the most clean and best way to go about recouping some of that money, especially considering that other cities in other ways have shown that you do not have to necessarily submit to every single thing FIFA wants you to do in order to extract the most revenue possible out of the tournament. We've seen in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium is a huge, amazing arena that is famed throughout the United States for, even by U.S. standards, to have very cheap concessions, snacks, Cokes. The amount that you pay for them inside the stadium is almost exactly what you would pay outside the stadium. And that's a rarity in the U.S. And FIFA came in, from what I've been told, and said, hey, you actually need to charge way more for all of the beer and all of the sodas and all the snacks if you're going to want to host World Cup games. And Mercedes-Benz Stadium just said, no, we're not going to do that, because then we would not be Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And they won that. And snacks in Mercedes-Benz Stadium are going to be cheaper than they are for any other World Cup venue. Kansas City is building a whole bus network in a city that has no real functional public transportation to speak of outside of one streetcar line downtown. And to access it for the duration of the tournament, you'll need to pay something like $50. And that's for unlimited rides. Now, $50 is not nothing, but it is, considering that they're creating something from nothing and allowing you unlimited access to it for the tournament, it's a little bit closer to what you would expect to pay for that.
What we're running into in a lot of these host cities is that the local governments of the cities and of the states are not the same as they were when the tournament was awarded to the United States in 2018. So that's what happened in New Jersey, where the new governor sort of was handed this deal that had been agreed to by a previous government and said, here you go, here's what you're doing. And all of these issues, I think, are downstream from the fact that FIFA has sort of, in almost like a hostile takeover, leveraged this entire tournament for its own benefit. At the last World Cup in the United States, at most every World Cup, there's a local organizing committee, usually run by the domestic federation. They will sort of get a bunch of people together and they will organize the tournament. And then FIFA will be involved, obviously. But what's happened this time around is FIFA has effectively moved in. They opened headquarters in Miami. They opened their little headquarters in Trump Tower, although that's more decorative than anything else, I think. And then they created these local organizing committees within the host cities to kind of handle the dirty work and the unprofitable work, right, of transportation and fan fests and all the rest. So there isn't kind of that organizational intermediary that's supposed to sit in between those two things that figures out stuff like security and transport and all the rest that you would normally have, because FIFA decided what they really need to do here is swoop in and make sure that they kind of concentrated as many of the revenue streams within their own budget as they could.
Can I ask about ICE, Alex? Baz mentioned it. It has fallen out of the headlines around the world. That doesn't mean they're not wandering around the streets in the US. I don't know. And there was a concern in the lead up that they might operate as security. There were lots of concerns that they would use World Cup games as an opportunity to, basically pick off undocumented migrants off the street, or, any diaspora, supporting their country. So I just wonder what the latest is on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right that ICE is not quite as in the focus as it has been, and certainly when we spoke in Austin and in the months previous, they are still very active. The ICE raids have not gone away. These things have not stopped happening. They're maybe a little bit less in frequency, a little bit less in headlines. And personally, I've always been a little bit dubious of the idea that they would use the World Cup as a mass staging ground for raids. I think that this is not an unreasonable fear. I just don't see it happening for a number of reasons, mainly because it would cast FIFA in a really, really bad light. It would end up blowing back on the Trump administration in a way that I think they really wouldn't enjoy. And also, this has been a fear for every major event that's happened in the U.S. since Trump took over for his second term. It was a fear for, I think, both Super Bowls, or at least, certainly the most recent Super Bowl. There was a fear that ICE would have large-scale operations outside of San Francisco. That ended up not really happening. There was a fear that they would be doing similar sort of operations outside of Club World Cup games. Granted, Club World Cup is a very different traveling sort of identity of fan that you get than the World Cup, but we didn't really see it happening. I think ICE is way more likely to operate in places that are where not quite so many cameras are, basically. If you were to be scared of ICE while traveling in the United States of America for the World Cup, I would be more scared of them away from the stadiums when you're just out and having an otherwise lovely time.
Leander, there was a point in that email about, Canada and Mexico feeling like a bit part player. And I'm very conscious that, we don't have any Mexicans or Canadians on this panel, for example. And, we will, of course, address that as we lead up to the tournament. But do you get that sense that, they are bit part players in this? Or is it just, US politics, US life is just a much more dominant force globally anyway?
I think it's a bit of both, unfortunately. I mean, this tournament was very much sold to FIFA as a uniting event that, during the first Trump administration, it was kind of the bid book says unity on the front, and it was presented as something that would help bring North America back together after some struggles over a wall that mostly wasn't built in the end. And the reason that we have three countries here is because the federations made a compromise, right? They figured out that if they went in together and unified their three bids for the World Cup, then they were all basically guaranteed to get the World Cup, and then they kind of divvied up how many games they would each get. So Canada and Mexico were always going to get fewer games, but they have definitely been overshadowed by everything that goes on in the United States. I mean, you can see it in the fact of how little Gianni Infantino has bothered to spend time with the heads of state of Canada and Mexico, whereas he's constantly at the White House. He's been to Mar-a-Lago, I believe. He's just always a presence around Trump. And so you can usually tell how FIFA feels about things and what's important to them by kind of tracking where Infantino shows up and where he doesn't.
Okay, that'll do for part one. Part two, we'll go on the pitch for a bit and concentrate on the USMNT. Welcome to part two, the Guardian Football Weekly. Leander, your book, it is 4-decade journey to the top or thereabouts. So you need USMNT to get to the top, ideally for your book sales, amongst other things.
Or thereabouts.
Or thereabouts.
That would be optimal. I would appreciate it very much. But I think realistically, the top for this team at a 48-team tournament probably means the quarterfinals. I don't know how you feel, Alex.
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, quarterfinals would be more knockout wins than they've ever had before. So sure, let's go with that.
Okay, so the group of Paraguay, Australia, Turkey. It's interesting, Leander, isn't it? That group happens and you think, oh, that's quite an easy group. Or it's actually quite a hard group. I can't tell. It's like there are no impossible games, but there are no simple games.
No, I think they would have or should have felt a lot better about the group if Turkey wasn't in it. If they'd had Bosnia or someone like that in that group, that feels more relaxing, I think, as a fan, as an observer, because Turkey's a good team, and they actually lost to Turkey in the spring when they had a qualifier, beat Australia in recent friendlies, if memory serves. So they've actually played all of these teams in the past year.
Yeah, they beat Paraguay 2-1, they beat Australia 2-1, and they did lose to Turkey and looked very much second best to Turkey. But you could debate as to whether or not it's a good or a bad thing, but I think it's just so fascinating that how often does that happen? Like, the three teams that you have to face in your World Cup group are teams that you have faced, like, within very recent living memory of every single person on the squad and the coach. The thing with the U.S. is, like, you just really don't know what sort of performance you're going to get out of them on a game-to-game basis from Mauricio Pochettino. They've had really high highs. They've looked amazing in a 5-1 win against Uruguay. Granted, all of these are friendlies, so who knows how much stock you can really put in them, or most of them are friendlies anyway. They've also looked extremely bad, like during the 4-0 loss to Switzerland just before the Gold Cup last year. Putting expectations on this group at any point is really, really difficult. And this squad in particular just seems so erratic. I really struggle to know what they're going to do with this group, because you're right. There is no like obvious weakling in this group. In fact, like if we're asking that question, where's the obvious weakling in this group? Maybe it's us. maybe we're the ones that everybody's looking forward to playing. It could very easily be.
Tyler Adams, the Bournemouth midfielder, has said that the USA struggle against European teams because the normal teams they play from CONCACAF require a completely different skill set to play against. Could you possibly expand on what he might mean by that?
Yeah, they tend to play teams where they have to break them down, teams with a deep block that they have to figure out how to pick apart. And so this team hasn't really had a signature win against a team that takes it to them and that attacks them relentlessly. They haven't really beaten a strong European team yet. So this is still a fairly young team. This is still a team that was basically rebuilt from the ashes of the U.S. failing to qualify for the World Cup in 2018, which was the first one they'd missed since 1986. And so that's one of the things that's causing a lot of anxiety, is that they can do it against Mexico and they can do it against Panama and all these other teams, but we've yet to see it against Belgium or Portugal, who both had a fairly easy time of it against the U.S. back in March.
It's also kind of a toss-up as to whether or not they can do it all the time consistently against the likes of Panama or Costa Rica, because those are tough games. And one thing that I think is really important going into this tournament, blessing and the curse of being a host, they haven't played any qualifiers. They've had basically no competitive games with the first choice squad. They had the Gold Cup last summer, but that was mostly second choice reserves, players that happened to be available, and none of the players that were not available, because the Club World Cup was happening at the same time. So that prevented a lot of really key call-ups, which, once again, I don't mean to repeat myself, just feeds into the notion that it's really hard to know what you're going to get out of this team. Are they going to step up when the lights are the brightest, or are they not? It really depends. They have the talent, but I don't know.
On your book, Leander, in my mind, I have Pele playing for the Cosmos, then I have Alexi Lalas and Tab Ramos, and then I have sort of now. And actually, the interesting thing is that 4 decades is nothing, isn't it? Like, it's just such a short amount of time.
It is, yeah. I mean, you have to consider where this program came from. After the U.S. beat England at the 1950 World Cup, which, by the way, was a win that was wedged between very bad losses to Spain and Chile, they basically disappeared for 4 decades. From 1950 to 1990, they were totally irrelevant on the international stage. They had a streak in the 50s and 60s where they went 11 years without winning a game. There was
great.
one qualifier late in the 1974 cycle where they didn't have enough players to field a full team, and they had to recruit a man from the stands just to make up the numbers. This was in a 74 qualifying cycle.
Oh, that's amazing. What, just as what was it, a tannoy, or just someone go, get your boots, Dave? That's unbelievable.
They found a guy who knew how to play, and that was the 11th man. And they've turned up to qualifiers without a coach. There was the 1966 World Cup qualifying cycle. They actually had 2 coaches, and nobody could seem to figure out who was actually in charge. And then in 1983, the federation was so desperate for any type of infusion of energy into the national team, because they could only afford to play a game, if that, every year, that they entered the team into the NASL, into Pele's old league, as Team America. They entered the national team as a club team into the league. Good. The trouble was that some of the leading players wanted nothing to do with it. They wanted to stay with their teams, with the Cosmos or with the Seattle Sounders. And so what you really wound up getting was a tribute band of the national team, such as it was, that came dead last in the NASL, and that folded after that one season. Around this time, it was just an unserious operation. The players were getting $5 a day per diems. They were turning down call-ups all the time because it wasn't worth the bother, because often they weren't brought together until the day of the game or the day before a game. And so to have gotten from there to finally qualifying by 1990 and to consistently reaching the knockout stages of the World Cup today is a bit of a sporting miracle. And that's really what the book is about.
Participation-wise, like kids, it's the most played game. It might be a bit like Australia, right? Like, it's the most played game, but then they lose all the players, then go off to where the money is, right? But do you see that is changing?
I think it is. Soccer has for too long been a rite of passage of American childhood, the way the Boy Scouts might be and the way sleepovers might be. And it's something that you would ditch and move on from once you became a teenager and you started getting serious about the real sports. The other issue is that youth soccer is prohibitively expensive, and it's really, really hard for a lot of families to afford it, which has been a bit of a common trend, I think, in today's conversation. And so that's frozen out an awful lot of talent over the years.
Feels like the cheapest sport you could play amongst the American sport. You don't need a bat. You don't need any pads.
One would think.
Yeah.
One would think, but like all of youth sports in America, it's been privatized, it's been commercialized. We have something called travel sports, which has basically devoured all of rec sports, which would be run by nonprofits or by local towns, and which would be free or very cheap. And it's been taken over by these leagues that are very much for-profit industries that'll charge, if you want to play at any kind of serious level, unless you're in an MLS academy, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars a year. And so the U.S. national team, especially on the men's side, has often looked a lot like the American upper middle class, because that's the only people who can afford for their kids to be seen and to play at the levels where the coaching is good and the competition is good.
I saw an interview Landon Donovan did on some podcast. He said that an awful lot of kids are being lost to the game because the coaching is prohibitively expensive. A lot of the parents are way too pushy, and he said the coaches are really bad at coaching at that level. So I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just passing on what Landon had to say.
If you think that FIFA are bad at extracting the most amount of money possible out of the game of soccer in the United States, you have to kind of stand in awe of all of the various youth soccer associations that dot the landscape, because it's really something, the sort of system that they've built up. And as to Landon's point about coaching, I would generally agree, but I will say, if I may be optimistic about this for a moment, that it's changing. All of this stuff is changing in a generally positive direction. None of this is stuff that's going to be fixed overnight, because it's all so systemic, and it's all just a product of this long run in the wilderness that Leander wrote about.
And I think an element of it is sort of generational as well, right? In order to have a really broad grassroots player development, you need fathers who can volunteer and mothers who understand the sport and who have grown up playing the game themselves. One of the big leaps forward that we're now seeing that U.S. soccer likes to talk about is that you now have executives and decision makers in corporate America who grew up as soccer fans, right? So you're kind of seeing the generations tick over, and for more people who have grown up with the sport to rise to positions where either they can invest in the game, or they can coach a team, or they can do something useful. It just takes a while for all of that to kind of coalesce.
On the subject of pushy parents, are we likely to see Gianni Reyna in the US squad?
Leander, you want to take that one? I don't know.
He seems a bit of a toss-up. I think there's absolutely a chance. I think Pochettino sees that he brings something to the team, that he has a technical ability, and that potentially he has a game-changing ability, that there just aren't very many players in the American pool who are able to do that. And yes, that invites the possibility of yet more soccer dad drama in an American World Cup.
He could be on the roster with Sebastian Berhalter, the son of Greg Berhalter. I'm sure there will be at least one or two things written about that, should it come to pass.
Until now, I didn't realize that when we see, that when the starting 11 come out, it's not the 11 best players in the US. It's just the 11 poshest people they could find, and that's who plays for the US. Leander, you were saying, we were having a little round robin email saying that one of the big questions at the moment is and it's a big question, but it's a good way to finish, I think, this ep is what does success look like for this World Cup? Like, what does soccer in America look like the day after it's finished?
You want a tournament to leave a legacy, right? And that means you wanted to accomplish a few different things. You wanted to introduce new fans to the sport, and that's tricky when it's so prohibitively expensive. There's an entire generation of Americans who, especially in soccer media, as it happens, who will say, the 1994 World Cup changed my life. I went to 3 games. I went to 4 games. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't sort of insanely pricey. And that sort of completely turned around what I was interested in and what I wanted to do with my life. You also want there to be money to invest in the sport writ large. And here, again, the federation being mostly frozen out of the tournament is really concerning, because 94 left behind a big pot of money, which they used to start Major League Soccer, which they used as the seed money for 2 Women's World Cups. That sort of was a chunk of money that did a lot of good over the long term for this sport that I don't see them getting out of this tournament.
That'll do for now. We will obviously chat to both of you plenty of times before and during the World Cup. And we will do our part to make Mexico and Canada also feel like they're part of it as well. But for the time being, thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Max.
Cheers, Leander.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Baz.
Thank you.
Football Weekly is produced by Rory Simons. Our executive producer is Joel Grove.